Alright, you know what? We've been doing a lot of negativity. Let's do some positivity. We gonna talk about this. We gonna talk about my man.
So it came as no surprise.
We gonna talk. If you don't know who this nigga is, some black pride, you feel me? Yes, sir. The richest man in the history of the world was, guess what? A black man. They won't tell you that though. A black king.
Most of the world's current wealthiest people made their billions through technology or industry. From Google's Larry Page to Carlos Slim and Mark Zuckerberg, a handful of individuals own almost all of the world's resources. In fact, a study recently showed that the 9 richest men have more wealth than the poorest 4 billion people on Earth. This staggering statistic is hard to believe, but today's biggest fortunes barely register when compared to the richest people in history. For millennia, these titles belonged to royalty. Because they were not burdened by taxation and bureaucracy, these monarchs could accrue wealth unhindered. Among them are Augustus Caesar and Cleopatra. But there was one individual whose wealth eclipsed all the rest: Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, whose name translates to Musa the Sultan, was not only the richest man in Mali, he was the richest person in human history. Details of Musa are somewhat scarce because he lived during the 14th century, but a few facts are certain. First of all, he wasn't born royalty. He was appointed deputy when Malinese King Abubakar Keita II left for a religious pilgrimage along the Atlantic Ocean and never returned. According to the laws of their kingdom, this made Musa their de facto king. Musa's ascension to the throne in 1312 also came at a very important time in history. The late Middle Ages were marked by population decline and unrest in Europe. The entire continent was suffering from famine, the Black Plague, and political revolution. At the same time, North Africa was becoming a hub for commerce and industry. At this time, Musa came to power and took advantage of the economic stability in his region. But Musa wasn't just opportunistic. He also inherited a country that was rich in natural reserves. Salt and gold in particular were plentiful in Mali, and he soon became a successful merchant in addition to his magisterial duties. He traded his gold all across Africa and Asia, establishing Timbuktu as the epicenter for commerce in the region. Before his involvement, Timbuktu was barely established as a permanent settlement, but after his renovation, the city had a constant stream of camels passing through, each laden with more than 200 pounds of either salt or gold. To this day, the salt trade is robust in Timbuktu and still serves.
This nigga Audie said while the colonizers were struggling. You know what we was doing? We was running up a bag off natural shit. You know what's crazy to think about? Countries in Africa never had to like invade other like shit to get. They just was naturally with it. You feel me? They had it just off the jump. You feel me? He ain't had to go. You see, he said had mad gold and salt and all that. He didn't have to invade other countries to get that shit. You feel me? Like it's the difference. It's levels to this shit. You feel me? You could what they say? What they say? Out the fucking dirt, out the mud. We got this shit out the mud. Them niggas had to go get it from other niggas. We had it out the mud, nigga. I'm just saying, like,
serves as a commercial hub more than 700 years later. In addition to the economic gains, Musa oversaw the construction of Timbuktu's most iconic landmark, the Great Mosque of Jen. As a devout Muslim, it was important to Musa that he pay tribute to his faith with his newfound power.
A devout Muslim. Now,
the Jen Mosque is made entirely from adobe and is considered by many architects to be one of the greatest achievements of the Sudano-Sahelian architectural style. Musa brought in architects from southern Spain and across the Muslim world to complete the project. The massive religious complex is the cultural center of Timbuktu and was recently recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But beyond architectural achievements, Musa's rule saw huge diplomatic gains. Using minimal force, he expanded the Malinese Empire to include modern-day Mauritania, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Chad. This is a particularly epic feat given that Musa only ruled for 25 years. In that time, his empire more than tripled. Many of the territories joined Mali willingly because of the relatively high quality of life afforded to its citizens. Though Musa was certainly not altruistic, the wealth of his empire had a positive effect on the economic standing of his subjects. But when push came to shove, Musa was not afraid to use force. His fortune afforded him a massive and well-equipped military, which he used on numerous occasions, ultimately conquering 24 major cities in his lifetime. Musa never lost a battle in his life, which caused both Mali and his fortune to multiply. Clearly, Mansa Musa had an incredible fortune, but it wasn't until 1324 that the world learned exactly how opulent he was. As a Muslim, he was obligated to take place in the Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca, in present-day Saudi Arabia. The Quran states that all able-bodied practitioners of Islam should visit the holy site at least once in their lifetime. Though it was treacherous to travel such a long journey in the 1300s, Musa was determined to make the 4,000-mile journey. As you can imagine, Musa Musa didn't travel alone. He arranged for the most impressive caravan in human history to accompany him on his journey. Musa made his pilgrimage between 1324 and 1325. His procession reportedly included 60,000 men, all wearing brocade and Persian silk, including 12,000 slaves.
Persian silk, my nigga. All of them. Persian silk.
Who each carried 4 pounds of gold bars, and heralds dressed in silks who bore gold staffs, organized horses, and handled bags. Musa provided all necessities for the procession, feeding the entire company of men and animals.
Okay. And you know what's crazy, too? We gonna talk about it. You feel me? He did all that shit, and he was feeding his slaves, too. Like, he had slaves. Alright, we ain't nothing, you feel me? He had slaves, but he was treating them right. That's like saying, hey, I'm a slave. Nigga, looking out for a nigga. Like, you feel me? All I gotta do is carry 4 pounds. 4 pounds? And they resting and shit, you feel me? He feeding all these niggas. It's not like he doing it and they dying and shit. He taking care of all these niggas, you feel me? Come on, man.
Those animals included 80 camels, which each carried 50 to 300 pounds of gold dust. Musa gave the gold to the poor he met along his route. Musa not only gave to the cities he passed on the way to Mecca, including Cairo and Medina, but also traded gold for souvenirs. It was reported that he built a mosque every Friday. These numbers have been corroborated by eyewitnesses who were in awe at his wealth and generosity.
Bro,
for Musa,
you know how much bread you have to have? This nigga's building a mosque every Friday. Oh, it's Friday? Hey, start building that shit, nigga.
Was the trip of a lifetime, and he spared no expense. An attendant was later interviewed by a Milanese historian. He claimed that at each halt he would regale us with rare foods and confectionery. His equipment and furnishings were carried by 12,000 private slave women, wearing gowns of brocade and Yemeni silk. It's no
private slave women. You was a slave wearing silk. Silk! Come on, man. Ain't nobody besides
known that Musa visited with heads of state on his journey, but most famously he met with al-Malik al-Nasir, the ruler of Egypt. As Musa's caravan traveled through Cairo, he received an urgent message from al-Nasir that he wished to arrange a meeting between the two venerable leaders. Musa refused, stating that he was merely passing through Cairo on his way to Mecca and that he had no business with the king. Historians later speculated that Musa was hesitant to meet the Egyptian king because this meeting would involve an insulting ritual in which all present would be forced to kiss al-Nasir's feet. Of course, this was well beneath Musa's gravitas, so he continued to refuse as al-Nasir sent a constant stream of messengers to his caravan. One of the messengers was later interviewed by a historian. He explained, "I continued to cajole him and he continued to make excuses, but the Sultan's protocol demanded that I should bring him into the royal presence, so I kept on at him until he agreed." Musa was apprehensive about the pomp and circumstance surrounding their meeting and tried in vain to get out of it, but the Egyptian king resorted to threats to bring Musa into his royal chamber and he finally acquiesced, given that he had no military to protect him beyond the thousands of slaves in attendance. The meeting grew contentious when Musa refused to kiss the feet of the Sultan, and only turned calm after Musa elected to properly greet al-Nasir. After stooping to kiss al-Nasir's feet, the mood thawed, and the two kings commiserated on the challenges of royal life and traded business secrets. Their revelry went on for hours, and in the end Musa made a powerful ally and trade partner. Following this conversation between the two men, al-Nasir offered lodging to Musa and everyone accompanying him, and Musa in turn left a piece of his incomprehensible wealth in Egypt. Though Musa's trip was intended only for religious purposes, it offered him latent business advantages in areas where he didn't usually travel. Musa spread gold throughout his journey as a gift to the poor and those who accommodated him, and gave a highly concentrated amount during his stay in Cairo. However, Musa's generous actions inadvertently devastated the economies of the regions through which he passed. In the cities of Cairo, Medina, and Mecca, the sudden influx of gold devalued the metal for the next decade. Prices on goods and wares greatly inflated. To rectify the gold market, on his way back from Mecca, Musa borrowed all the gold he could carry from moneylenders in Cairo at high interest. This is the only time recorded in history that one man directly controlled the price of gold in the Mediterranean. Upon reaching Mecca, Musa was singularly focused on his religious faith. While his attendants and slaves continued to distribute his wealth, he spent weeks in prayer and formal ceremonies across the city. This part of his life is marked by discipline rather than excess. During his long return journey from Mecca in 1325, Musa heard news that his army had recaptured the strategically important city of Gao. The city had been within the empire since before Musa's predecessor's reign and was an important, though often rebellious, trading center. Musa made a detour and visited the city, where he received as hostages the two sons of the Gao king, Ali Kolan and Soliman Nar. He returned to Niani with the two boys and later educated them at his court. When Mansa Musa returned, he brought back many Arabian scholars and architects. The conquering of Gao was seemingly effortless for Musa, but it helped cement his reputation as fearless and invincible leader. And Musa's legacy continued as he began to focus on education. Upon his return, the University of Sankore in Timbuktu was restaffed.
See, what they're not going to talk about though is, you see what happens when us black kings get power, what we do, we're enlightened. He, instead of looking to conquest, the only time he conquered shit was when he had to. You feel me? When it was necessary. You feel me? He wasn't out here just doing shit to do it. He's like, I got to. You feel me? Just so I'm not weak. But when he has free time, I'm learning, educating myself, becoming better, enlightening. You feel me? What is the Yakubs do? What they do? You feel me? When shit comes, oh, I need more. They just attacking niggas. I need it. I just want it. No, bro. No. Listen.
With jurists, astronomers, and mathematicians, the university became a center of learning and culture, drawing Muslim scholars from around Africa and the Middle East to Timbuktu. By the end of Mansa Musa's reign, the Sankore University had been converted into a fully staffed university, with the largest collection of books in Africa since the...
Hey, I ain't gonna say too much, but there is a country that tries to, like, you feel me? Tries to do what Mansa Musa did, you feel me? And say that when they conquer shit, they make it better, but they really don't. But we not gonna say too much. We not gonna talk about it though. You feel me? It's too many eyes. We not gonna talk about it.
Library of Alexandria. The Sankore University was capable of housing 25,000 students and had one of the largest libraries in the world, with roughly 1 million manuscripts. At this point, Musa was by far the most famous individual in West Africa, so it came as no surprise when his picture was included in 1375 Catalan Atlas, one of the most important world maps of medieval Europe. After this, word of his...
If I just disappear, just know what happened. I'm not on no pilgrimage. I did not do it to my, you feel me? Listen, I love my life. I'm gonna make that statement right now. That's what I'm saying.
Wealth spread across the Mediterranean and up through Europe and East Asia. But unfortunately for Musa, his amazing success had unintended consequences. Upon discovering the vast wealth that Mali had accrued, a race began across Europe to invade and conquer the empire. It was first invaded by Portugal in 1444, when soldiers lined the coast and diplomats tried to foment slaves to rebel from their masters. The Milanese Empire put up a good fight and prevented Portugal from conquering them entirely. But after years of sustained warfare, Portugal colonized several important trade centers on the Milanese coast, essentially cutting it off from the world. This colonization continued for hundreds of years, and Mali eventually became a French colony. The French exploited Mali for its natural resources and forced its inhabitants into poverty. Though Mali is a sovereign nation today, French is still the national language, and the average citizen only makes $780 in a single year. This is a far cry from the robust empire that Mansa Musa created. Though it is difficult to adjust Musa's wealth to match modern-day billionaires, economists have estimated his net worth at an unbelievable $400 billion. To put that in perspective, the richest person in the world is Jeff Bezos, who amassed a fortune of $109 billion through the success of Amazon.com. He is closely followed by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who each have about $90 billion.
Nigga, Mansa Musa before, like, technology was, like, worth $400 billion. And he ain't need technology and all this extra shit, you feel me? He had all that shit on his own, you feel me? Like, that's natural wealth. But we not
$1 billion. They made their fortunes in technology and the stock market respectively. This means that no one in the world has even a quarter of Musa's massive fortune. The closest historical equivalent is John Rockefeller, whose adjusted fortune is about $340 billion. He amassed his fortune through the U.S. oil company and various other industrial ventures. But even then, Rockefeller's net worth is a full $60 billion short of Mansa Musa's. Though he's far from a household name, Mansa Musa was one of the most influential and powerful people in human history. His jaw-dropping wealth came from a mixture of luck, hard work, business acumen, and military strength. In the 700 years since his death, no one has even come close to breaking his record, and he still stands as the wealthiest person in human history.
That's crazy. Y'all want to see how much some money is? Let's do it in rice. Here, look. At this point, like, I'm convinced, bro. This nigga gotta eat people. He's a cannibal. Cause, like, at this point, when you get so rich, what do you do with your money? There's literally, listen, the man lives life without a care in the world. He literally doesn't worry about anything. He will never have, he doesn't, like, okay. He worries about business moves and he, like, you feel me, investing in shit. The man will never have to worry a day in his life. The niggas buying houses like niggas buy bags of chips, like. Like, hey yo, can I imagine loaning a nigga 100 million and it not even really meaning anything to you? The nigga could single-handedly end world hunger. You know how much money you have to have? Single-handedly, him himself. Be like, hey, I want to end world hunger today. That would be boring as fuck? Absolutely, bro. Listen, I want, like, you feel me? I want to be well off, but I don't ever want to be, like, filthy rich, bro. Because at that point, what is there to do? There's literally nothing. Like, you don't want for anything. You could have anything in the world. That's why when people be talking about some niggas buying and selling people, I believe it, bro. I believe it. Like, at some point, these niggas get to the point where they're like, all right, I literally own, nigga bought tigers, elephants, all that shit. Why not? Like, you feel me? Like, all right, I want to own a person. The nigga got the money for it. Jeff Bezos owns Twitch. Well, it was a good run. Shit. It was a
Can
good
you
run.
watch this?
What is this? It was a nice little run. Hold on. I gotta open up Streamlabs. Bitch, don't get too comfortable. You better not get too comfortable.
Sitting here waiting on my package. Yeah.
I'm not watching that, bro. Nigga, what? Boom. What the fuck is that? Nigga, I'm not watching that, bro. 5 African royals that were taken in the Atlantic slave trade. Let's move.
The Atlantic slave trade was a tragic event that most...
Okay, before we continue, I want niggas to understand. I seen this on Twitter too, and it made me really think about it. Slavery is a lot worse than they made it seem, bro. It's like niggas like don't understand how much they downplayed that shit in history, bro. It wasn't just niggas working outside all day and like the whipping. Like niggas used to did research and they found out that niggas used to like buy and sell like slaves for culinary purposes. Just to eat. They used to like wear their skin like as like, bro, and it's crazy. You know why? Because America is made it seem like if you really think about it, slavery is one of the worst atrocities in like human history. American slavery. For real. It's up there. It's up there. I'm not gonna say with what, because you know they're gonna cancel me as soon as I start talking about it. But it's up there. It's definitely top 5. I promise you. Atrocities? You don't know what the word atrocity means? They watered that shit down so decent, bro.
Bro, they used to feed our kids to alligators for fun. Slavery was x 10,000 worse than we think because it's them telling us about it.
That's what I'm saying, bro. Like, it's crazy because who's telling you about slavery? The people who did it. You feel me? So they're not gonna, like, okay, look, right? Take it in perspective like this, right? Look at it like this, right? When you hit somebody or when you do somebody, anytime you've ever done somebody wrong and you have to tell, like admit to it, you always downplay. You be like, it wasn't even
Tory
that
didn't
bad,
shoot that man.
Whoa, okay, but relax. That nigga's wilding out, bro. Niggas be like, I didn't really. It wasn't even that bad. But meanwhile, you broke homie leg. Like, nigga, what? The colonization of Africa, bro. Listen, man. The YT people. I'm not gonna lie. You know what? Listen, man. If we ever in person and y'all want to talk to me about it, we can talk about it. But like, you feel me? Listen, man. Just know that YT people, they are responsible for a lot of the tragedies that have come about.
Nah, being serious, watch this after. This is wild.
Them niggas are responsible for a lot of the tragedies. You feel me? Like, and it's
just to be honest.
What, bro? All right, nah, I'm not watching that.
Why were most slaves in the New World Africans, especially considering West Africa is thousands of miles away from the Americas and Europe? Slavery has existed in multiple forms throughout history and across a wide variety of cultures. But slavery in the early Americas, meaning the North American colonies, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, was ultimately powered by the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants. And there's an important question many people don't stop to ask. Why Africans? There was nothing inherent to the social or psychological makeup of West Africans and their descendants in the 17th through 19th centuries that made them more prone to enslavement. So, to get to the heart of our question, we should first ask ourselves, why did Europeans set out to colonize the Americas to begin with? Okay, so before I dive into the answers to these questions, I think it's important to note that there is no such thing as benevolent slavery, since any system that's predicated on the exploitation and extraction of labor through violence and force cannot be considered fair. However, the purpose of this rough timeline is to sketch a comparison without creating hierarchical values of assessing harm inflicted on enslaved people. To set the scene of the early American colonies, European powers such as Spain, followed by Portugal, the Dutch, British, and French, ventured out in search of conquest and capital. Their early explorations of the Americas, starting in 1492 and continuing up until the 18th century, weren't driven by wanderlust and a desire for adventure, no matter what Disneyfied versions of colonization we learned in the movie Pocahontas. Instead, they were looking for one primary thing: wealth. And this could mean gold and silver, or it could mean land, farmland, and commercial crops. The driving incentive for exploration was to increase European.
So, let's cause we're gonna, as we watch this shit, we're gonna compare. Mansa Musa, you know what he went out to do? A religious pilgrimage. You feel me? And as he went, he spread wealth. You feel me? He showed love. He's like, damn, y'all culture is dope as fuck. I will pay you for your culture, bro. I will give you this for your culture because I like your culture, bro. He's seen shit. He's like, I like that. I'm not gonna take it. I'm gonna give you what it's worth. You feel me? These niggas, nah, I'm going out there because I want shit, bro, for myself. Because, you know what? Them motherfuckers is greedy. It's just, let's just break it down. Niggas is greedy. Them niggas was you see the difference? You see the difference?
In power and to fatten the royal coffers. But initially, slavery was not the source of this wealth. The early Spanish colonists to Central and South America in the 16th century wrested control of silver and gold mines that had been controlled by Incan and Aztec empires. By forcing native groups to extract silver and gold from the mines they had already established, colonists were able to meet their desires for high profits with low labor costs, aka no labor costs, because they weren't exactly intent on paying anyone. And the colonists were brutal. By working native people to death, cutting off limbs if they didn't extract enough materials quickly, or threatening them with murder, the Spanish were able to increase their mining efforts in these regions and to meet their specific demand for increased wealth throughout the 16th century. And despite European expectations, in other regions like North America or the Caribbean, there weren't huge repositories of gold and silver to send back to Europe. But even though there was little precious metal to be found, the monarchies and the early colonists who arrived in these areas were equally intent on yielding high profits. So they turned to crops that yielded high profits like sugar, tobacco, rice, and later cotton. In order to assure the highest profits, they began to look to slavery, since European laborers and indentured servants required payment or other forms of protection. So next we have to ask, when did colonists in the Americas turn to the African continent as a site for extracting slaves? The first enslaved Africans arrived in the North American colonies under control by the British, the areas that would later become part of the US, in 1619, when 20 were forcibly transported to Jamestown, Virginia by the Dutch. But the first enslaved Africans had arrived in the Caribbean and Latin America prior to that, starting as early as the first decade of the 16th century. Because remember folks, the colonies established in the Americas, plural, cover South, North, and Central America plus the Caribbean, and not just the present-day US. But the transportation of African people into slavery began before the colonization of the Americas. According to an article by Professor Dr. Hakim Adid, the Portuguese began enslaving Africans in the 15th century when they arrived on the African continent for the purposes of trade. Around that time, they were enslaved Africans among other enslaved and free populations in Portugal. So even though it wasn't the only or necessarily most widespread form of slavery at the time, this 15th century precedent would set the stage for later decisions surrounding slavery that were to come in during colonization in the Americas. But at that point in time, captivity wasn't extended exclusively to black people or people from the African continent, and was often the result of raids, warfare, or slave trading that included Islamic Islamic traders, West African groups, and Europeans, among others. Okay, so we've established the precedents leading up to the explosion of the West African slave trade. So our final question is, why did European colonists start to look exclusively at West Africans as a source of slave labor? And how did the emergence of chattel slavery in the Americas differ from pre-existing forms? Remember that the colonies were established to make money for royal families and wealthy colonists, and a small class of wealthy colonists who owned large plantations looked to increase their margins through not paying for the labor that generated their cash crops. So it wasn't that slavery was needed to develop the colonies, but rather that it was decided that this was the quickest way to enrich the people invested in getting rich. Black slaves continue to arrive and
Enrich who? Enrich who? Who are they enriching? The white people.
the Caribbean, North America, and South America through the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, and it wasn't until the 19th century that slavery began to be eradicated. However, by this point there was a large slave population in the Americas, and the condition of slavery was considered legally hereditary, with children taking the status of their mothers in perpetuity. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, colonists found that the previously established system that relied on enslaving conquered enemies was not functioning for several key reasons. Namely, first, early attempts in the Americas to enslave Native Americans proved difficult because they had familiarity with the terrain of their own nations and land. As a result, the potential for escape or revolt was high. This made using a system of leading raids and then enslaving whoever lost the battle less achievable, since colonists had little to no idea how to survive in these new regions and often fell prey to diseases which Europeans had no immunity to, namely malaria. The subsequent rampant genocide of Native American people and the introduction of new diseases that decimated their population, namely smallpox from Europe, made widespread enslavement less possible. But by transporting people from West Africa to the Americas, European colonists wanted greater ability to control enslaved populations by making escape more challenging and reducing the risk of those who did flee blending into neighboring native nations. Although the fact that there continued to be slave revolts amongst enslaved Africans and their descendants proves that this calculation was often mistaken. Second, West Africa was often the source of forced and kidnapped laborers because of its proximity to seaports, which made contact between these three locations more possible. Also, laborers from West African countries were more familiar with the agricultural methods needed for mass cultivation of these kinds of crops in the New World. So, how does it all add up? Well, even though the slave trade brought an estimated 9 to 12 million people here from Africa as cargo, colonists eventually resorted to reproduction within the colonies as a method for sustaining slavery. This meant that slavery could be passed down as an inherited status from mother to child. And to justify this never-ending enslavement, we started to see the evolution of false race science and racialization used as a justification for why one group of people, specifically people of African descent, were the only ones who could be enslaved. But this shift erased the reality that prior to turning to West Africa as a labor source, slavery existed across racial lines and was dictated more by battles and military capture than by skin tone. The resulting idea we had about race evolved out of a desire by people engaging in the slave trade to find an after-the-fact justification for enslaving people from one specific region over others. This history of racialization is covered in our episode on the origins of race in the USA, so check that out if you want to learn more. So, what do you think? Got anything to add to this historical puzzle? Any other resources or thoughts to share? Drop them down below, since this is obviously a much bigger timeline than I was able to
listen, bro, when I'm chilling, I watch shit like that, bro. Like, I'll look into shit to see, like, you feel me? Whoa, hold on, fuck the bullshit.
The sponsor of this video, Retail Me Not, has an exclusive pose and stoic samurai, adorned in their elegant kimonos and top-knotted hair, wielding their iconic katanas. What if we told you that among the ranks of this ancient warrior order was a black man from East Africa? This is the tale of Yasuke, the first man from outside Japan to don the dual katanas and
the original Afro Samurai!
the only African to do so. To begin the tale of the African samurai, we must first establish the context. In the early 15th century, the Portuguese Empire had a scattering of trade outposts across the Asian Pacific. In the year 1543, they reached southern Japan. The Japanese relied heavily on the import of silk from Ming China, and as the relations between the two states were icy, and trade between the two was forbidden by the Ming Emperor, the Portuguese established a niche trade by buying silks in China and bringing them to Japan. These European merchants grew very rich as intermediaries between the two Asian heavyweights. The Portuguese were allowed to build a trading port at Nagasaki, which quickly became a large hub for commerce. And where the Europeans went, their priests would soon follow. The Catholic Society...
I just want everybody to know in chat that I'm changing my Twitter name to Yusuke. I'm just letting y'all know. So when you see me on Twitter, my shit's Yusuke. Like, don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. You already know. You already know I'm coming. The original black samurai. Nigga, what the fuck are you talking about?
Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits, established a significant presence in southern Japan. Their mission was to convert all Japan to Christianity, spearheaded by priests like Francis Xavier. At the height of their influence, several daimyo lords and over 200,000 Japanese were Christian, mostly in the Kyushu region. Of course, the Portuguese and their Jesuit compatriots were spreading their influence on other continents as well. By the 1500s, they had established a foothold in Africa, in what is now Mozambique. Here they became enthusiastic participants in the local slave trade, acquiring many poor souls from the local chiefs, who they would in turn ship out for labor across their maritime empire. That a dark-skinned man from Africa became a samurai in feudal Japan is considered a fact. However, we know very little about him. Details on his country of origin, early life, and even his original name are muddy at best. We know only the name given to him by the Japanese, Yasuke. The story we've chosen to depict here is our personal interpretation of the few pieces of information we have about his life. We have only theories for the origins of this mysterious man. Some say he was born around the year 1555 in Mozambique, which at the time was being colonized by the Portuguese. He was most likely of the Makua peoples, a Bantu tribe, although some claim that he was from Ethiopia and belonged to the Habshi people. Either way, the saga of this East African man began in his childhood, where he was most likely enslaved and given to the local Jesuits. He was taught the Christian religion and the Catholic lifestyle, and brought up to believe in the proselytizing ways of the Jesuit order. After some time, Yasuke was given to the Jesuit inspector Alessandro Valignano. Valignano's mission was to audit Jesuit activity in Japan, so he sailed east with his servants and slaves in tow. Thus, in the year 1579, the as yet unnamed man of East Africa first set foot on Japanese soil, behind the coattails of his Jesuit master. It is here we should briefly explain the Japan that he stepped into. The Warring States period, known as the Sengoku Jidai, was nearing its climax. Japan had been divided into many independent little fiefdoms in 1467. By 1579, however, most of these fiefdoms had been conquered by the ambitious daimyo Oda Nobunaga of the
That nigga just thought I bought a fake sword? Nigga, this shit's real. This shit will cut you. What?
Oda clan and his vassal Toyotomi Hideyoshi. In 1581, Valignano brought his African servant into Kyoto, the beating heart of Japanese civilization and seat of Oda Nobunaga. The Bantu man had likely never seen a metropolis of such size and bustle, nor had the people of Kyoto ever seen anyone like him. When rumors spread of a giant man with skin like charcoal, the local Kyotans grew so curious that they broke down the door of the Jesuit church just to get a look.
I'm not gonna lie, Japanese people have always liked black people. Like, my brother stayed in Japan, like, in not so much China, but in Japan, they fuck with black people. Like, they niggas saying cap, bro, they fuck with black people in Japan, bro. Like, in Japan, not China, Japan, nigga, what? Japan love us, bro. What?
Look at him. The African quickly achieved status as a local celebrity, for the common folk were astonished not only by his dark skin, but his size and height, as he stood a solid foot taller than the average Japanese man. The growing fame of this enigmatic foreigner eventually piqued the curiosity of Lord Nobunaga, who ordered the Jesuits to present the African to him. When they came face to face, Nobunaga was
Wait, Nobunaga? Hey, isn't he like he's like famous. He's the man who united Japan. Not for real, like Nobunaga is like, he's like one of the only people to ever like, you feel me? Like,
astonished. The warlord did not believe such a man could exist, and was convinced he was actually a Portuguese man who had his skin dyed with black ink. He had the African stripped from the waist up and be thoroughly scrubbed. This of course proved that his skin was naturally dark. Upon realizing this, Nobunaga took a genuine interest in the man, and it was at around then that he finally received his Japanese name, Yasuke. Yasuke soon became more than just a novelty to Lord Nobunaga. The daimyo came to appreciate the man's personal integrity and his physical prowess. He declared that Yasuke possessed the strength of 10 men. In the summer of 1581, Nobunaga's admiration of this strange foreigner had become undeniable, and thus he formally requested that Yasuke enter his service. It was official now. The man of humble Bantu origins was a samurai. Yasuke was afforded all the privileges any other samurai would receive. He was granted a piece of land and a household upon it, Japanese garments, and a ceremonial short katana. It can be assumed that he was taught the Bushido code and how to fight as a samurai. Yasuke became one of Nobunaga's favorite servants, and was one of the few people afforded the privilege of dining with the great daimyo. Yasuke soon joined his new lord in his mission to conquer all Japan. He likely saw combat at the Battle of Tenmokuzan, fighting fiercely alongside Nobunaga's forces to destroy the Takeda clan. It was the first time any Japanese warrior had encountered an African in combat, and the strength and ferocity of Nobunaga's newest soldier was a thing to behold. After the engagement, Yasuke rode at Nobunaga's side as the lord surveyed his newly conquered lands, and one can only imagine the wonder that many would have felt seeing such a giant of a foreigner riding in such a position of prestige at their liege lord's side. On their way back to Kyoto, he rubbed shoulders with many of Nobunaga's powerful allies, names we consider larger than life. One such man was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who in time would conquer all Japan. In June of 1582, Yasuke and Nobunaga arrived back in Kyoto. Nobunaga split his army and sent them forth to conquer the lands of the Mori, Uesugi and Hojo clans. He retired to the Buddhist temple of Honnoji, where he intended to rest. Surrounded only by artists, merchants, poets and servants, Nobunaga was largely unprotected. Yasuke, however, was by his side. Disaster was soon to come. An enemy host surrounded the temple. This was a complete shock, for none of Nobunaga's foes were supposed to know he was there. One of Nobunaga's most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, had betrayed him. He took advantage of his knowledge that Nobunaga was vulnerable and laid siege to the temple where his liege lord stayed. The treacherous Mitsuhide stormed the temple with overwhelming numbers. Yasuke charged out, mounting a desperate battle against the odds, with only a few bodyguards and servants fighting by his side. He fought bravely, but to no avail. Amidst the chaos and fire, Nobunaga had to commit seppuku, honorable suicide, so as to avoid capture. Somehow, Yasuke was able to escape Akechi's clutches. He found a horse and rode hard for Nijo Castle, where Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobutada, had mustered his forces. Where he had failed to protect his lord, Yasuke was now determined to protect his son. He arrived just in time, joining the young lord's army just as the traitor Mitsuhide attacked them. Yasuke fought hard in the battle that ensued, once more engaging Mitsuhide's samurai and slaying many in the defense of young Nobutada, but once again it was for naught. the Oda forces were routed, and Oda Nobutada was captured and forced to commit seppuku. Yasuke too was captured and presented before Mitsuhide. The traitorous general had nothing but contempt for the black man, declaring him to be non-human, little more than an animal. Because he was not Japanese, Mitsuhide declared that Yasuke was not to be killed and instead sent to the Christian church in Kyoto. And thus, after serving as a noble samurai for over a year, Yasuke was returned to his Jesuit masters. Reportedly, the Christians eagerly praised God when reunited with the man. It would be a nice thing to believe that Yasuke's tale had something of a happy ending. Unfortunately, we don't know. All records of his existence fade away after this point, and we do not know what his ultimate fate was, whether he left Japan with the Jesuits or died on the islands. From humble beginnings on the east coast of Africa to the grandeur of the palaces of Kyoto, the rise of Yasuke from slave to samurai is a unique one, to say the least. He may not have been a samurai for long, and his influence upon the island nation may not have been as great as other foreigners who followed him, but his story serves as the inspiration for various pieces of media, such as anime like Afro Samurai and games like Nioh. Whether it be the man himself or what he represented, Yasuke enjoys a special place in the hearts of many Japanese people today, and is a wonderful story of what strange fates can be thrust upon the humblest of men. The sponsor of this video, Retail Me Not, is the ultimate destination for saving on your online purchases, and it now has a browser extension called Retail Me.
Man, listen. We ending there, bro. Y'all know what to call me. Yasuke. The Afro Samurai. I'm not listening, bro. I'm gonna be real. That's how y'all gotta refer to me as now. For real. If we being honest. Honestly. We got homework. Yeah. Go over your reading. Rewatch the VOD. This is gonna be a pop quiz tomorrow. Yeah.